Hello, and welcome to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast. In this podcast, we explore and dive into the stress-filled world of high conflict divorce and relationships. We offer solutions to calm your world down and allow for greater positive engagement with your children and the people around you. If you find value in this commercial and advertising-free podcast, please consider donating by pressing the donate button so we can continue our helpful work. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody, to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast with Brook Olson, and again, my good friend and special guest, Eric Sjoberg. In this week's episode, we are going to be discussing time travel. This is a IFS, Internal Family Systems, conversation that I'm excited to have. It's an opportunity to visit different places and make changes in a different way. So sit back, enjoy this. Oh, this should be a really interesting episode for us.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric Sjoberg with Unveiling Self podcast with my special guest and friend, Brook Olson. We are here today to talk about the impact of doing psychological, if you will, time travel to the past, in particular, to help clear trauma and injuries and misconceptions and poor attachment injuries. And so it'll be an interesting entry into this facet of shadow work and utilizing a more overt method of time travel. Sometimes I call it the time machine, or sometimes talk about having a spacesuit for time travel. So this is out there at first glance, but as you get more comfortable with the notions of multiplicity and that we can have parts that are stuck in the past, in our childhood in particular, and don't know where the rest of us are and don't know where the body is in the here and now because they're stuck in the past. So yeah, this is very much in the realm of internal family systems, Richard Schwartz material. I've had a conversation with him about this on another podcast on this show that you can hear a little more of how he talks about it. He talks about it in different ways in a lot of his material. So welcome, Brook, and let's go see what this does.
You and I have talked about this a little bit, and I know that you utilize this a lot in your sessions with your clients. And I'm not so much. And I'm intrigued a little bit of this. I understand, play with it a little bit. But this notion of being able to put on a time travel suit, and to travel back in time to heal trauma is a very interesting prospect, and I'd like you to speak a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so, I mean, I've been doing shadow work on myself and clients for decades now, and looking at where these kinds of experiences in my childhood have really intensely impacted me, and where some of them have been blocked out from my memory for much of my life. And I find this to be pretty consistent with a lot of clients that I do coaching with on this stuff. And so it is worth kind of getting into the nuts and bolts of. One component of it is that the capacity that we have to do this kind of time travel as practitioners, therapists, or clients really is built on the structure of self and the notion of self. And this podcast that I do, it's called Unveiling Self because I'm feel like we need to have a lot of different conversations about what that means to get to understand it, because it's not easy to get. And I'm still figuring out parts of it, and how they relate to parts. And so one notion is that when someone is either new to the work or have been doing it a while, but they're approaching some material in their shadow, in their some of their parts that are very distressed, there isn't much self. Like either the person hasn't really cultivated that much, or they are in a zone where that capacity for self is limited, if it's there at all. And so when the qualities of self are limited, the practitioner or therapist is holding the self energy. They are being in their own power, love, and presence, and their, care and compassion and curiosity and all of the 8 C's in such a way to create a level of being that has the ability to tolerate some of this material, this discomfort, this anguish, whatever it is that's showing up, in a way that there's a lot of grace and ease. So where the self of the practitioner that is coaching this person needs to have a fair bit of self with whatever the material is.
And this, just for a quick reference, is kind of the entry point for almost anybody that's starting the therapeutic process, right? I mean, they're coming in because there is something that is warbly in there that they're trying to figure out, and that sense of self typically is
right,
not strong.
Yeah, and I think one of the, Richard Schwartz speaks a lot about how important accepting the notion of multiplicity is, which is not a full tangent here. I'll circle back, because most people don't really get the notion that we are many selves, we are many parts, and they're disparate, and some of them are burdened and stuck in other times and places, and they don't know it, and they're causing a mess in our life in this time and place. And so right there, that place where parts, once we kind of we swallow this notion that's kind of out there in the beginning of multiplicity, that we're kind of multiple personality beings in a way that isn't disordered. It's actually the norm underneath things. And where once we kind of get that, then we're getting thrown into this notion of time travel in a way, like, let's go to that part where it is in the time and place where it's stuck. And that advent into the conversation, inviting and accepting that a part is stuck in another time and place, is really the portal where this begins and opens. And it doesn't work particularly well if either the practitioner or the client is not yet bought into multiplicity, or not yet bought into the notion of what we're talking about today in the realm of time travel. So that said, this is a pretty interesting arena to talk about together, Brooke, and kind of like bounce here and see what both of us can learn more about it, and what we can share in a way that listeners and viewers on YouTube can take in.
This concept, of multiplicity is not new. We can go back 20 years, 20 plus years. We can talk about what Bradshaw brought together in the concepts of inner child work, and, these other components that have been gradually built on to this point where Richard Schwartz has come in and he's really codified this in some different ways that make it a lot more accessible. And from self from here, from now, from distress, from shadow, doing some of the shadow work, what we're able to do is allow an opening for these different parts that are caught in space and time to be able to come forward and express their distress in ways that they weren't be able to do in that space and time that they were in.
Right. And I think what a way to flush that out a little more is if I have a part that's stuck in another time and place, it has two hurdles between it and being gotten by a practitioner, by the self. One of which is there's other parts here that it doesn't really understand or aware of, and it's stuck in another time and place. So for that to be accepted, for those two things to be just, yeah, of course, to be that, to make that ordinary in the conversation is pretty helpful for the part, because all of a sudden there's the self, perhaps, and the practitioner are there, and they're in full agreement that, yeah, you're a part and you're stuck in another time and place. And where the part initially is like, what? Wait, what's happening right now? No one's ever done this before. Or I still don't trust this even though we've done this before. And that is a process of the part evolving into this way to connect to self and even other parts and the practitioner in such a way that the part can feel gotten. And to circle back to your point on, this stuff has been around forever. So I was deep in the work of Robert Bly and Malidoma Some and what's his name? Michael. We'll put it in the show notes. Michael Mead, and so I was doing men's work weekends and 5 days with those guys, and it was all about using mythology in a way to frame time travel and parts. So it was and has been pretty normal in the Jungian, in particular in the Jungian interpretations of mythology and Joseph Campbell. And so that stuff's been around forever, and it fits really well together with IFS in a lot of ways. And that topic is probably worthy for a conversation with a Jungian, which I've got one that might be willing to do this with me. But it's, there's that, and then there's the, different religions that are very willing and able to be in the notions of multiplicity. So Hinduism has lots of different gods, and that is an affront to some religions that have just one god.
Well,
But as you move into it and understand it, it's really each different god is a facet. It's like a hologram of
exactly.
God, and where it is.
Well, and it's not just a hologram of God, it's a hologram of self. Each one of those are a representation
Right.
of an aspect of self, of who we are as human beings. So to, kind of take that affront out and really talk to what, that particular Hindu aspect is, each one of those is what we're talking about, is an aspect of
Right.
the multiplicity of self as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and here kind of touching into the conversation about contexts of self. So interpersonal within self, interpersonal between people, and omnipersonal between many or between all. And where a lot of the religions are speaking in ways that are touching on one of those three contexts at a time, typically. And so to be oriented, to have your kind of navigation aid of like, what context am I in right now? And to be attentive to that, because if we're in one context, if we're in the interpersonal conversation, a couple session, for instance, and I'm stuck or I'm in a part that's really wanting to be plugged into the all and everything of the omnipersonal, that really interrupts the conversation. And there isn't a being gotten by the other person. And really the person that is going to the omnipersonal isn't really getting themselves, because they're not understanding that relationship that is happening in the interpersonal conversation. So that's a lot of kind of highfalutin backstory philosophical stuff. Where do you want to dig in, Brooke?
Well, I think that what we've just talked about is important for the foundational piece of, how we move in deeper into this conversation. And the work that you and I have done, a lot of the work that I've done along the way, really speaks to these aspects of time travel, parts work, coming back into understanding why some of the behavior that we have exists. And in order to be able to do that, there has to be a relationship with that split, with where that that impact of the trauma came in and shattered that part of self and cut it off.
Right. And I think your word understanding is an important one, but it's only one of some very important pieces. That's a cognitive frame of acceptance. And then there's also compassion, which is, the love component of acceptance.
Right.
And
coming out of self-judgment and coming out of what occurred with everything around that. And giving that basis for, and I'm going to use the word understanding again, of how the survival mechanism of either disappearing or having a behavioral aspect come forward for survival in this helps us in the here and now to take in that energy, to be able to get a sense of, this is a part that is lost, and I can make a shift if I can be in self here, but I have to be in contact and understanding of what that part was trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
Then.
Yeah, for sure. I think that understanding is a portal that can lead to acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've found, having done this work for so long and been around so many clients that are struggling with this, is I now have a pretty comfortable state of acceptance and compassion, even if I don't understand it yet, because the understanding is imminent. Dick's latest book, No Bad Parts, is really a beautiful title, because we have this, he's stating right there, even the parts that you think are horrible in yourself or other people, if you find them in the time and place where they're stuck, you can see they're in an act of love. They're trying to love you in their very little kid, not very worldly, not understanding way.
Cognitive dissonant.
Yeah. But to just know that, like that place that I'm so grateful that I've entered, of just knowing there are no bad parts. I've worked with, some clients who've done some pretty horrible stuff and haven't been able to have um, successful facilitation to help them heal. And this does wonders for that. And I know Dick has worked with people on death row and pretty violent offenders of various sorts. And he speaks of that in the book, and it's really profound to kind of be in the world, in this world right now, to be in the ability to use this technology, some of what we're talking about here, to have compassion for people that are on the other side of the battle that's happening. If I'm on one side and someone else is on the other and they're yelling and screaming and telling me how horrible I am or how horrible what I believe is, I can be in a place of real compassion for them because they're stuck in another time and place, and perhaps stuck in another time and place than I am, but it all works out in the end. And it's like, there are no bad parts. And it's like on this dimension, everyone that's doing everything is trying to, just get along and love themselves and their parts, but it's all tangled up in time and these shameful strivings for unitive self. Like, I'm just one person, and all this makes so much of a mess.
In this process, as we develop as human beings, each one of these spaces in time, traumas, events, input from others, is how we collect our combined self in our beliefs.
Well, our little s self or big S self?
Our little s self.
Yeah.
Where all of our beliefs come floating in and consolidate that of what we think, what you and I might have referred to as an idealized self-image or any of those components.
Yeah, I think the language in IFS of that state of idealized self-image, which comes from pathwork, as far as I know.
Right.
In IFS, it's self-like part,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a bit of a trap door. It's like one of those things where I think I'm in self, and something's off somewhere, or somebody's having a hard time with me, and it might be that I'm actually in a part that thinks itself. And that's a speed bump that can take years to really clean up in some cases. And so, that is a conglomeration of related parts in a system, perhaps, that think they're self and that really are striving to feel more powerful, more loving, more present, but they haven't really done the work of moving into the shadow work and finding the parts that are in incompetence, which circles into the conversation that we've had about the stages of competence, a whole podcast on that.
So we've been talking around the time machine.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about, if you will, a conversation that somebody might have with themselves, or how you as a practitioner might have a conversation with a person about entering into that time machine and doing some of this work backwards.
Yeah. Well, it's any examples I give are limited because there's really an infinite possible ways and forms of how this comes. But the entry point could be some conflict with someone in this here and now, with a spouse or an ex or a child or a parent, and there's just a lot of agitation. And so there's this stress level that's in there, and where the person may be blended with that stress, blended with that part, and how to slow it down enough and even put the stress and the stories of that part on hold through just dropping in and, acknowledging that part, breathing. And I will invite clients to breathe and to slow it down and to kind of let the story go for a little while and cultivate some level of self in themselves. And parenthetically, I will invite clients to do these kinds of meditation and breathing practices as often as they can in between sessions, to kind of facilitate those neural pathways of being able to slow down and settle and not chase whatever thought or emotion or story that's coming up throughout their day, and be able to kind of drop in and pause in little ways, maybe in bigger ways. And so that process is kind of creating for the client, helping them create this sense of feeling powerful in their body, feeling compassionate for the part of them that's kind of sitting just over there that's having a hard time, and feeling present to my body, to what is, to the drama that's been happening because of this experience or this part, and to just take a little time and space and let that open. And sometimes there's long gaps in the conversation as this person is kind of going inside and letting this experience open and letting it become their own rather than just whatever I'm coaching them on. And let that become the vehicle. So this, the process of having the ability to do time travel in this way that we're talking about, kind of psychological, neurological shadow work time travel, we need to have the self dialed in to some degree. And, the language that I use is a little more, I prefer a little more than what Dick does, is power, love, and presence. Got a whole episode on that one. And so checking in, like inviting the person to check in. Do I feel powerful right now? Do I feel present? Am I present to what is in this time and place? And am I in compassion for my parts that are feeling stressed out? And if not, what can be done just right then to bring that up? And one of the things that I found very effective is if in that moment the client is struggling with that, or they notice they don't, if they ask the part that's freaking out, what do I need more of? Do I need something more? And if the part doesn't know, the menu could be, do I need more power? Do I need more love and compassion? Do I need more presence? And I think so far in the sessions that I've been doing it in this way, the most common response is the part wants self to have a little more power. It doesn't trust the power. Maybe the part wants self to have a lot more power. And so I have clients do something physical in the moment during the session, such as doing, 10 squats or 10 push-ups or 20 or 30 or whatever it is that kind of brings them into feeling powerful. And then come back into breath and check in and feel what that's like, and then check in with the part And most of the time, the part's like, oh, yeah, I trust you a lot more now. And then the part will unblend because that's really mostly up to the part, is the choice to unblend. So that then there's enough space between self and the part for the time travel to happen. And so that then opens into something. You can edit that, George. It's not supposed to be street sweeping day. I think I might be getting a ticket.
So I want to take just a moment because that was a lot.
You think?
And I want to reduce it just a little bit for a moment and then open it back up to the conversation, because you and I do this work. You and I do this work for ourselves. You and I do this work with our clients. And we've got people watching and listening to this podcast that are at an entry point, or they don't know what this even looks like or feels like. And I want to start to give our audience some orientation and some initial tools, maybe to help them start to open these doors so they can come into more exploration of this with you, with their therapist, with whoever that they're working with. And for the clientele that I work with, there's a lot of stimulus in their system around getting lost in this timepiece, both with themselves and with their ex-partners and with their children as a stimulus to this. And that stimulation comes in the form of physical distress or psychological distress. There's a warble that is typically the initial piece. And oftentimes the orientation for them in that warble is from a victim standpoint. I don't want to go deep into that triangle and all of that again, but something's happening to them from the outside.
Right. And I think just the fine tuning of that is that even if they're enraged and wanting to yell or yelling,
Right.
that's still most 99% of the time stacked on top of feeling violated and victimized.
Exactly. So what I'm aiming at here, and speaking back to what you've already talked about, Eric, is part of being in self is being able to notice orientation wise that I am stimulated, that there's something going in my system that is maybe more energetically charged than is needed for what's actually going on. So there is this high level of agitation.
Right.
That is the point of, okay, I'm lost here. And to come back to, and having that willingness to come back into these tools that you just mentioned of breath, of orientation, of taking space and time to just hang out without movement and letting the system find some level of settling so these parts can be seen away from that level of energy. So one of the tools that is used in that process is there a part here? And can you ask them to just turn the volume down a little bit so you can hear them? Because the overwhelm doesn't help either one of us.
Yeah.
Present or part.
Yeah. No, I think that's for sure a helpful tool, because most of the time the parts have learned to scream because they were being ignored.
Right.
In some fashion or other. And so they enter into the screaming, and maybe even the family system is built around ignore or scream.
Mm-hmm.
And and I think the another layer of what it is that you're speaking of here is that this level of intensity is really, I find that the word urgency is a helpful inquiry. Like, am I in urgency right now? And to track that the urgency feels like it's gigantic. It's like overwhelming. Whereas the situation that one is actually in, it's like that big.
Mm-hmm.
So the disparity of urgency is an indicator of some kind of combination of parts being present in another time and place, where it makes total sense that that gigantic level of urgency is happening. And so that recognition by self, and in particular by the practitioner, is really helpful to not shame the urgency,
Mm-hmm.
which is so important. And so that can be, like turning the volume down and turning the intensity of the urgency down is important, because it's like, hey, part, I'm actually listening to you right now. And it's harder for me to listen to you if you yell at me, if you are in, a 5 alarm fire. And so if you can turn it down and see if I'm still here, and see if maybe I can get what it's like to be you a little bit more wherever you are, and just slow it down and be present with the part that's doing that. And I'm speaking as though I'm either self or practitioner right now, because sometimes the part can be so agitated that the practitioner would be best suited to shift into going direct to the part rather than speaking to the self of the client to be with the part. So you can go direct. And so that going direct can help if there is rapport between the part and the practitioner, which can take a little time to develop.
And it occurs to me as you're talking in this multiplicity again, that the slowing down and this being in self, noticing the part noticing the self, the part noticing the practitioner, all of these other components that may be going on here. And also the whole gallery of parts that is also watching this party go on,
Mm-hmm.
is initially, again, that entry point is one of orienting to one another and to the space and time that each one of these are in.
Mm-hmm.
And then being able to jump maybe back and forth in that space and time to further orient and connect
Mm-hmm.
through that portal.
Right. And so these kinds of, in some ways, we're looking at this through the lens of a wormhole.
Right.
Like, we're here now, and there's a part that's there and then. And so how do we get more skillful in traveling to there and then in a way that works, in a way that feels safe for the part, in a way that feels safe for the self, and in a way that feels safe for the practitioner, even, because that's not always a given. I work with some people that have some pretty horrid trauma, childhood war and death and destruction and murder, and And some of that stuff is like, I got to be like on my game of really coming into my own self to be able to do that, and to support the client to do the same thing, and to be able to support the client in this time and place where they are safe, where they made it. Somatic experiencing. Peter Levine used to say, used to coach, I think he still does, coach the client to say, I'm alive. I'm alive, which is really an anchoring in this time and place. Because here and now, I'm alive. And maybe in that scene wasn't so clear. Even if that scene was not being acknowledged, like wanting mother to pay attention, to look at him or her, and mother just ignoring and doing her thing and off in her own world, and where that felt like death, and where that is no better or worse than physical violence and destruction being witnessed. It's overwhelming. It's an overwhelming experience for the part. And that's why we're doing this, is the part is stuck in an overwhelming experience in the past and doesn't know where and when it is. So the process of getting the part to trust self and to be willing to share everything it wants to share about what it's like to be the part in that time and place, until the part is like, yeah, okay, I think you got it all. And then the conversation opens. Well, what would you like to do now? Like, there's the process of full unburdening that Dick talks about, of giving up all of that pain and fear and whatnot to air, fire, water, earth, wind. And that certainly can be done. And I do that sometimes with clients. And sometimes that's not really necessary, but it's a helpful tool. And so the other layer of it is, hey, part, where would you like to go, rather than that place where your needs are not getting met, whether it's for safety or love or attention. And so that is another layer of this, of inviting the part to go to another place where it would like to go, which might be into the present moment with the self of that part. And it could be just going off into spirit and, being done.
I like that piece that you brought in, because part of the work is helping in the unburdening process, bringing that. We've gone back in time with this part. We've gone and met that part in its place and in its time. And part of the healing, part of the orientation to I'm alive, I made it, is when the timing's right, when the feel is right, is asking that part if it would like to see where it came to, where the here and now is, to experience the world through the eyes of self. And one of the things that I like to do in my own process, because, I ride horses, I'm out in nature a bunch, is I like to bring some of these little guys along on the ride with me.
Right.
And let them see the horse and feel the horse and see the outside air and be able to experience of, oh, I am alive. And wow, this is pretty cool where I came to. And that's part of the time travel piece as well.
That's an awesome piece. I do something similar with my parts. One in particular who's 7, which was the age I was at when most of my bad stuff happened, and where he's pretty unburdened now, and he's able to kind of go on walks or runs or hikes or have experiences with me. And like in particular in walks, I'll feel him inside of me and I'll say, hey, you want to drive? And I'll let him steer the movement of my walk.
Mhm.
And he's very awkward. He's not quite in his body yet. And and I'll just hang out with him and make that okay and like play with him there, and then he'll say, okay, now your turn, and then I'll walk and I'll do my kind of functional movement training, which is my current iteration of healing from that awkwardness that I've been working on all my life. And he loves that. It's like surfing for him. And so we play in various things like that. And I think that moves towards the time travel coming back to this time and place where like post healing, post unburdening, where there is a really profound experience available of gratitude for being alive, for horses, for nature, for connection, for play, for these facets of love, of attunement, affection, appreciation, allowing, attention, play, these things that we got little or none of, we can have now and be in the ongoing discovery of what that's like, and to live in that, and to maybe have some bumps in the road around it here and there, but to be able to not have those bumps be devastating and triggering into previous overwhelm places or dissociative patterns.
So there's one more piece that I want to talk about with you before we wind this down, is the possibility, we've talked about projecting into the past and the past into the present. What about time travel into the future?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is something that I play in, and I don't hear Dick talk too much about it. I've talked to him about it some, but my sense is that is possible in a way, and to kind of fumble into learning what that means is an important part of the healing process as well. But it's also part of like how do I upgrade my life into something that I like doing? And so, we're in January today, that we're having this conversation on January 26th, and most of us have some marker of considering what it is that we're planning to do this year. It's like in the culture. And I've done various iterations of that with clients and groups, and with myself. And so like I'm in a pretty strong endeavor to get in shape right now with cardio and strength training. And so holding the vision of and the experience and the sensations of what that feels like, what that will feel like, what is that going to feel like, and what is that going to look like, and how is that going to shift my sense of self when I've lost the weight and where I've gained the functionality and the movement, which is a little different now that I'm 60 than it was when I was 40. Like this spacesuit I'm in needs some serious work as far as being able to do time travel in a functional way. And so I'm experimenting with that. And I would say that there is the cultivation of self, of power, love, and presence are like the knobs. They're the levers in my spacesuit or in my spacecraft to be able to get more skillful at moving into the future and back, and like feel what that's like and come back, and recognize that there are some decisions that I may make in the future that will move me towards my intent, and some that might move me away from it, and to be curious about them, not to be rigid and not be like, all right, no, I can't do that because I want to do this other thing. Be like, well, what would that look like to do that? And, will that take me on a different track? Will that tank my weight loss because the Nomad donuts are so good? Or whatever the thing is that's going on. Um, and and to experiment with, like, what is it that helps me be present to where I'm steering towards in the future, and how do I do that, because it's not going to be linear. Like, I'm a sailor, I grew up sailing, and you can't steer a sailboat into the wind. You have to kind of go this way and that, and it will take you there if you kind of know how to do it, even though you're not directly heading towards the thing. So there's this process of using self and the sensations of self energy to cultivate this spacesuit to be more able to move into the future. For instance, this podcast, which I started over 2 years ago and have been tanked by COVID and moving and lots of intense experiences that have shown up in my world. And I've kept the notion of doing this on my radar and adjusting what it is that I'm doing in creating and bringing forth this podcast, refining it to be more in alignment with myself and with what it is that I think is helpful to my clients and other people that might want to listen. And so that process of cultivating self in service of facilitating my time travel into the future is it's fun. It's something I find very fun when I'm not jacked up in some kind of a spacecraft crash. Another component of that is looking at aging. So I'm a fan of listening to and watching Peter Attia's podcast, The Drive, and he's kind of on a similar run here, because his whole thing is around understanding aging and healing it and healing the diseases that cause death as we age, so that we can live longer and not be like living longer in a home on a tube. And so, like, his goal that I love is he wants to be in the Senior Olympics at age 100. He wants to be competing in the Senior Olympics at age 100, and he's gone in and looked at muscle loss and different kinds of mitochondrial effect on the brain and the body, and working backwards from that.
So he can get there.
So he can get there. And it's a game. It's no longer like trying to buff out and lift weights to be, to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's about, like, what is the premium method of getting his body and his diet and his practices such that he can get to that point of doing the Senior Olympics and doing, like, he wants to be able to get up off the ground at 100. He wants to be able to put his own overhead bag on a plane. Mm-hmm. So it's a fun arena to play in, and I think I want to explore that more here in our conversations, and maybe with other guests to see what other people are playing with in here.
One of the things that I think I like to play with my clients with this notion of time travel into the future, because the human brain is really a remarkable tool. It doesn't know where we are. It doesn't know if we're here or there, depending on where our orientation is to. And like what you were talking about, the development of the things that you wanted to take care of, getting here in the podcast, doing the things that you have projected out into the future, have these highs and lows as they are in real time and as they are in that time travel process. So I'm in it. I'm in my process of moving into the future. I've got these goals, and then something comes in and smacks it, and I have to make an adjustment.
Right.
And then I ride the adjustment, but I've still got that goal out here, and then I've got this high moving toward that goal again.
Right.
But without that projection, without that goal going out there, there's a malaise or a stall that happens about my state of struggle right now. And I think one of the escapes, and I'm going to use the word escape kind of real loosely here, out of the struggle in the moment is into that future movement. This is where I am, but this is where I want to go. This is where I want to live. This is what my state wants to be with a partner. These are the things that I want to create for my children. These are, and each one of those have a component that we are pushing on and moving towards that isn't here and now, but we can experience it as if it's here right now and create that moment going forward. So again, for a lot of my clients, they are in a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to them that that struggle is not going to go away. And that becomes their perseveration. That becomes where their focus and their stuck is. And what I try to help them do is break that and go, okay, but where do you want to go? You want to stay here. If your focus is on this, this is where your focus is going to stay, and you're going to be stuck here. But if you move that in the way that you were talking about and not get stuck with this, oh, I hit a block, I got to fold, but no, I hit a block, I got to shift, mm-hmm. then the movement is into a positive direction. And concurrently in this time machine conversation that we're having, the perseveration on the past and stuck with the part mm-hmm. is part of what is the continuation of the struggle, the stress.
It's a vicious cycle.
Right.
Yeah. And I think the place of this, you know, the application of effort towards some future thing is a real art form. Yes. Because I have a number of clients that go into white-knuckled effort towards some future thing. And they're stressing the hell out of themselves doing it. And one of my teachers in this is just the story of Thomas Edison failing at 9,999 light bulbs before he found the one that worked. And he would just, like, he didn't get flustered. And he had a vision. He knew where he was going. And he just chopped wood and carried water, and okay, that didn't work. 10,000 times. Like, wow. I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to do that. And, you know, that place of face planting repeatedly and learning from the mistakes of every face plant and endeavoring to be like, okay, how can I not make that mistake again? Oh, damn, I made that mistake again. Oh, I made that mistake 20 times in a row now. Oh, okay. Let's see how to do this and not let it be tanking me and putting me in you know, crushing me, which I've had that experience many times.
Right. And I think kind of encircling what we've been talking about today is future having a foundation in the past. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking with these parts along this timeline, if you will, the part knowing that we got here and we're here, and it was a struggle, and we
an
hit
emphasis on we, because right. It's not just the part by itself here, it's right. The part with you
and the collective.
Mm-hmm.
but we got here, and these are the things and the struggles that we hit, and we got knocked down, we face planted, we struggled. There was a lot of that took place to here, and here's okay. We're okay here. I'm alive, and things are good. And I am going to move into the future, and this pattern is going to continue. But I can look back and I can say, I know how to succeed. I've succeeded. And I know how to do this.
Right.
And I have the capacity and the resiliency to hit a wall and to move forward.
Right. And how to, like, how to choose to steer towards kindness, regardless of the failures. Like, wow, that is, like the Dalai Lama's statement, my religion is kindness. Like, oh, there is a lot right there. And you put that in the context of failure and repeated failure, and it's very interesting. Like, I was tending to my dying aunt last weekend, and one of the caregivers was this delightful young woman, I can't tell, 40s, from South Sudan. And South Sudan is not a good place. And she was able to get to the U.S. through legitimate means as a, what do they call it? As a, not as just a straight immigrant, but she was allowed to escape the pain and suffering there. And pretty sure she was a child slave there as a woman, which is not a pretty sight, and lost lots of people. And she did, she had a whole travel to escape that, and going to different countries before she landed in the U.S. And she has since started, she started a childcare center and grew it from a little house into a whole building. And then COVID hit and she lost it. And now she's doing something else, and she's happy and delightful and has nonprofit for girls in Sudan. And it's really amazing to see how much pain and struggle and suffering that she's had, and she's maintained and really chosen to stay bright. And I think that is a point in the future that we can all endeavor towards in this process of time travel into the future. And it is served by healing those parts of us that are stuck in the not so nice places in the past.
All right.
Sounds like a good place to stop.
Yeah.
So thank you, Brooke, for joining me again in this, and your poignant and penetrating and interesting questions. And yeah, this is cool.
These are really good cross-platform podcasts that you and I do. There's a lot of enrichment that you bring to my my listeners, and we really kind of take off on different notions about how to be here and how to function within stress and a world that is kind of torn up. So thank you for taking your time to do all of this.
And how to have a better party. I like to say that phrase.
Have a better party.
We're trying to have a better party here. Like, we only got this, maybe, unless you're really intent on having another life that's better on this planet or somewhere else. But for the time being, how to have a better party on this planet in this life, and how to have some ability to affect that involuntary process of having a good time some of the time.
Thank you again, Eric. We'll see you guys all again next week. Take care.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Brooke. And more will be coming soon. Thanks for listening.
Brooke, people don't have to wait until Friday mornings to get more content. If this is something that's helpful for them, right? This isn't the first time you've
broadcast anything or record anything or put anything out there in the world. What are the other ways people can get the help more aggressively or speed up their recovery process? What materials are available for people right now?
Well, I've written a book called The Black Hole of High Conflict, and it's available on Amazon and Kindle.
Great.
And everything that we're talking about is really compressed and put into there. So this is a really good starter place to get in and get your mind working and to see what these concepts are about and how to start to apply them. The other place that I think that is valuable is to go to our website and look at some of the blog articles that I've written. Those are available there as well. They go into some of these other arenas, and that's at www.highconflict.net. So the book, the website are also really good places to get the material. And also we have classes. We have high conflict diversion program classes that you can get into and get some one-on-one help with this as well.
And you know me, I'm aggressive. Whatever I want to become good at or learn, I find someone who's good at it and pay them and hire them and shorten my learning curve. What if somebody just wants your help? Somebody says, Brook has this information. He's good at something I'm not good at yet, and I want to work with him. Do you have any type of coaching or consultations or anything like that?
Absolutely. I do one-on-one coaching for custody cases. I help people get ready for family court services. If you've got that in your community, I work with attorneys and clients to help them with managing and strategically setting them up to have more successful cases as well.
And how do they reach out? You want them to just go to the website or email or phone, or what's the best way for them to reach out, raise their hand, and say, I need some help?
They can email me. My direct email is brook at highconflict.net. That's BROOK at highconflict, HIGH, conflict.net.
Perfect. That's everything everybody would need to get some help, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Brook.